Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today we're going to take a look at a game designed by Friedemann Friese, a pretty prolific German game designer. This is a game by the name of Gipfelkraxler, which I believe translates to summit climber or mountain climber. And in this game, players are going to be 2 to 4 players at ages 8 and up are going to be basically using die rolls, Yahtzee style, to try and be the first person to scale a mountaintop twice with their little goat meeples. It's a game that definitely feels like a Yahtzee variant, but just one that happens to use a board. It has some interesting leapfrog mechanics, I suppose, but generally it's a pretty simple family game. Let me take a minute to show you how it plays, and I'll come back and let you know what I think about it. Here I've set up a 5-player game of Gipfelkraxler, and the game, it plays up to 4 players, from 2 to 4 players, and each player is going to get a set of these little goat meeples in their color. You can see they're pretty cute, and they'll start at the base of this mountain area. So this is a game where you're trying to be the first person to get 2 of your little mountain goats up to the top of the peak. And you're going to do that basically by doing Yahtzee rolls. So the game comes with 5 standard dice, and on your turn you get up to 3 rolls to try to advance one of your goats. And you'll notice that on the board there are these printed signs that indicate what roll is required to move into the next space. So here, for example, all of your dice have to total 15 or lower. Here they would all have to total 20 or higher. This requires 3 of a kind of a 4, 5, or 6. This is 2 pair. These that's what that symbol means. And this one here is a 3 of a kind of a 1, 2, or 3. So here, let's see, I have 16, 19, 20. So I might just choose to move up here with my goat, and that would end my turn. If ever I would roll and none of my goats would be eligible to move, I would have to pick one goat and move it back down to the base. So there is a penalty if you're not able to move a goat successfully. Then would just go on to the next player's turn, and they would get to roll the dice. And you'll notice that some of these spaces here have multiple goats, whereas some of them, when you get further up, only have 1 goat. And these spaces with the 1 goat could only hold one piece, whereas these with the multiple goats can hold more than 1. So the way that this works is, as over the course of the game, as you add more and more goats, if you move onto a space, let's say I moved onto this space that had, it's a space that could hold multiple goats, I moved on with one of my goats, that would push one of my own goats up. So if I move on with a die roll to a space that holds multiple goats with at least 2 of my own, one will move up automatically. Sometimes that could set up a chain reaction. Let's say that this is what the white player had here. They were here, and then they were here and here. If they moved up here, if they moved this goat further along with their next move, they would be able to go like that. This would bump this goat, and this would bump this goat. So you can see you could set up chain reactions. Now, if on the other hand, let's say that this was a situation, this Korean player had their piece here, and the white player moved their goat here, this player's goat would get bumped. Instead of going up, they would go down. And you can see on the board, there are these paths that are marked with these arrows. So here, you essentially would follow the river. So this goat would float downriver to the next available space. And that might potentially bump another goat if there was another player's goat here, and so on. And there are sometimes choices, so if you move from this space, you can go here, here, or here, moving upward. But whenever you're following the river, you just follow the arrows to go down. If ever you get one of your goats to the summit, each player is going to have one of these tokens here, which is essentially just a scoring token. It starts on this side. When you get your first goat there, you just flip it over to indicate that you have 1 point. That goat will remain there until another player gets up there. Then you'll finally get it back to your supply. It'll start back on the bottom of the mountain. And then the first player to get a second goat up there will be the winner. And that is pretty much how you play Gipfelkraxler. All right, so that is Gipfelkraxler, and I think that this is a pretty light, pretty familiar family game. It definitely takes the fundamental basics of Yahtzee and just adds a few small elements onto them, such as controlling your meeples and having your die requirements change based on your board position. The game plays in about 20 or 30 minutes, which is about how long a game like this should take. One disappointment of the game is that it does only play with 4 players. I suppose you could play with more players if you just substituted something in for another set of pawns, but then I would worry that downtime might get a little great. So maybe if you played with 5 or 6 players with your own pawns, maybe you would want to limit it to just one time up the mountain or something, but then the game could end quickly. So it's hard to say exactly what the perfect balance would be, because this game does seem like it wants to play with more players, because as it stands as a 2 to 4 player game, especially with 2 or 3 players, it's all too easy to just focus on one path and just try to not interact with any other players, hope that you get lucky and are able to scream to the top of the mountain. And I think that the game's most interesting aspects are what happens when players interact with each other, when they force a player to float down the river, and so on. And the game, only really in a 4-player game does that become something that's guaranteed to happen, because there's essentially 3 paths going up the mountain, and with a 4-player game you're going to be forced to interact with one another at some point. So I'm not sure that I'm smitten with this game. I think that it's a average family game. I think there are plenty of dice games that I prefer. I would say games like Picomino or Liar's Dice are obvious favorites of mine. But even among Yahtzee variants, I prefer something like Roll Through the Ages, which is definitely meatier than this, but it uses those basic Yahtzee mechanics in what to me is a more interesting manner. At the same time, this is a game that when I've played it, it's gone over very well. It's cute. You get cute meeples. It's immediately familiar. It's more of a game to play, I think, in a socializing setting, as opposed to one where you're really wanting to focus on the games. If you're just sitting around with people playing, with drinks, or just playing with kids and just doing it as a social activity, it's mindless, because the game is so simple that it doesn't get in the way of your social interaction. So that is good. I should mention that the game does not come with English rules. I did print some off of their website, so they have on Amigo's website some full color English rules that you can easily print off, and the game is so simple that you will never need to refer to them once you've looked at it once. One thing that I did mention, I guess, or did not mention rather, as far as rules, is that if you get 5 of a kind, you could use that as a wild for any roll of your goat, so you can always move up the mountain with a 5 of a kind. So in all, those are my thoughts on Gipfelkraxler. Apologies if my pronunciation of that is incorrect. And yeah, it's a cute, light family game. Nothing exceptional, but if you're looking for something with a little bit more on its next step than Yahtzee, this would be a really good suggestion, I think.